The wedding dress answer. The studio shimmered under the golden lights that had become the heartbeat of Family Feud. The air was alive, that familiar blend of laughter, nerves, and anticipation that filled the Harpo soundstage before every taping. Crew members moved like clockwork, audience murmurs swelled into applause, and Steve Harvey, the anchor of warmth and wit, stepped onto the floor in his immaculate burgundy suit. The cameras found him, and instantly, the energy shifted from chaos to choreography. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day when even routine episodes could hold unexpected electricity. The studio smelled faintly of hairspray, leather seats, and warm coffee from the green room. Every light reflected off the polished stage floor, glowing against the deep blue backdrop where Family Feud blazed in gold. The familiar game show music pulsed through the speakers, but underneath it all was something else. The unspoken hopes and dreams of two families who had traveled hundreds of miles for this moment. At the left podium stood the Chen family, 5 women spanning 4 generations, each carrying exhaustion and pride in equal measure. At their front was Lisa Chen, 34, her hands slightly red from chalk dust and sanitizer, the marks of a public school teacher who had worked through long days and longer nights. Her smile was polite but distant, like someone who had learned to perform strength. Behind her stood her mother, Margaret, whose weathered hands still bore her wedding ring after 43 years, her grandmother, Mrs. Wang, clutching a carved wooden cane that had been her companion for the past decade, her teenage daughter, Sophia, with curious eyes that darted between the cameras and the scoreboard, and her younger sister, Amy, nervously bouncing one heel against the carpet. The Chen family's journey to this moment had been years in the making. They had applied for Family Feud 3 separate times, each application representing a different crisis: medical bills, school tuition, the constant struggle of making ends meet in Sacramento's expensive housing market. This 4th attempt had finally broken through, arriving with a phone call that Lisa initially thought was a scam. Now, standing under those blazing lights, the weight of their collective hopes felt almost crushing. Across the floor stood the Martinez family from Phoenix, fiery, loud, alive with the kind of energy that made producers smile. They cheered for every answer, laughed easily, clapped before Steve even finished question. The patriarch, Carlos Martinez, was a retired construction foreman whose booming voice could be heard even over the studio audience. His wife, Rosa, wore her lucky earrings, the same ones she'd worn to each of their children's graduations. Their twin sons, both in their 20s, had the kind of easy confidence that came from growing up in a family where laughter was the default response to everything. The early rounds had gone smoothly, each family settling into the rhythm of the game. Questions about breakfast foods and holiday traditions drew laughter and good-natured teasing. Steve was in perfect rhythm, tossing jokes with his trademark timing, his eyebrows doing that signature dance that had become his calling card. The audience was eating up every pause, every raised brow, every moment when Steve would stare directly into the camera, as if sharing a secret with America itself. By the time the scoreboard read Chen family 67, Martinez family 134, the tension in the studio had reached that perfect pitch where every answer mattered. The Chen family had played conservatively, relying on safe, logical responses that consistently appeared on the board. The Martinez family had taken bigger risks, swinging for answers that either hit big or missed completely. Steve paused at center stage, that moment before the next question when the entire studio held its breath. He could feel it in the air, that electric anticipation that separated good television from great television. The production assistant had already signaled from the booth that this round could determine the momentum for the rest of the game. "All right, folks," Steve announced, walking toward the center stage with that magnetic swagger that had become his trademark. "This one could change the whole game. Y'all ready for this?" The crowd erupted in cheers that seemed to shake the very foundations of the studio. Spotlights refocused with mechanical precision, bathing the center stage in brilliant white light. The cameras adjusted their angles, each operator knowing instinctively where to find the perfect shot. The next question card waited in Steve's hand. Glossy white cardstock with blue lettering. Harmless in its appearance, just another piece of paper in what would be hundreds he'd read that day. But some questions Steve had learned over the years carried weight beyond their simple words. Lisa Chen stepped forward for the face-off, her movements deliberate and careful. She smoothed her navy skirt, her best skirt, the one she wore to parent-teacher conferences and school board meetings, and exhaled slowly, trying to calm the rapid beating of her heart. Her fingers found the buzzer, gripping it perhaps a little too tightly. Steve noticed the subtle tremor in her hands immediately. In his years of hosting, he had developed an almost supernatural ability to read contestants. He could spot nervousness from across the stage, could sense when someone was overthinking, could tell the difference between competitive excitement and something deeper. What he saw in Lisa's face wasn't game show nerves. This was the heaviness of someone carrying more than just her family's hopes for victory. "Lisa," Steve said gently, his voice dropping to that paternal tone that had comforted thousands of contestants over the years. "You good, baby?" Lisa looked up at him, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm good, Steve. Just thinking." Steve studied her face for a moment longer. There was something in her expression that reminded him of his own daughter, when she was working through a problem she couldn't quite verbalize. It was the look of someone standing at the edge of something they weren't sure they were ready to face. "Well, don't think too hard now," Steve said with a gentle chuckle, trying to lighten the moment. "Sometimes the first answer that comes to you is the right one." He smiled, that warm, encouraging smile that had become his signature. "All right, baby, let's play." He lifted the card with theatrical flair, the same gesture he'd made thousands of times before. "We surveyed 100 married women. Top 6 answers on the board." He paused, letting the anticipation build. "Name something a bride might worry about on her wedding day." The question hung in the air like a prayer waiting for an answer. Usually, this type of question brought immediate responses, quick laughs about the weather or her dress fitting, or the groom showing up on time. It was designed to be lighthearted, the kind of survey that generated obvious answers and gentle humor. But this time, something was different. Lisa's finger hovered over the buzzer, motionless. Her breath caught in her throat as if the question had physically struck her. 5 seconds passed. Then 10. Even the normally boisterous Martinez family fell quiet, sensing that something unexpected was happening. The studio audience, usually quick to offer suggestions or encouragement, found themselves held in a strange suspension of anticipation. Steve's eyebrows raised slightly, his signature expression of gentle curiosity. "You thinking real hard about this one, huh?" he said, taking a small step closer to her podium. His voice carried no impatience, only the warm concern of someone who recognized that this moment had become about more than just a game. Lisa swallowed hard, her eyes glistening under the harsh beauty of the studio lights. Her lips parted as if to speak, then closed again. The red light on her buzzer seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. When she finally found her voice, it emerged as barely more than a whisper, trembling with the weight of truth she had never spoken aloud. "Finding someone to walk me down the aisle." The words fell into the studio, like stones into still water, creating ripples of silence that spread outward until they touched every corner of the room. The effect was immediate and profound. The audience didn't gasp or murmur. They simply stopped breathing. The camera operators, usually focused solely on their technical responsibilities, found themselves frozen behind their equipment. Steve Harvey blinked slowly, his mind processing what he had just heard. In over a decade of hosting Family Feud, through thousands of questions and tens of thousands of answers, he had never heard anything like this. Not because the answer was wrong or inappropriate, but because it came from a place that existed far beyond the comfortable boundaries of game show entertainment. The silence stretched, becoming its own presence in the room. Steve's natural instinct was to keep the show moving, to find a way to acknowledge Lisa's response, while maintaining the energy and pace that made good television. But something in her expression, a vulnerability so raw and honest that it seemed to strip away every pretense in the room, made him pause. "Say that again for me, sweetheart," Steve asked, his voice automatically dropping to the gentle tone he used with his own daughters when they needed to share something difficult. Lisa lifted her chin slightly, drawing strength from somewhere deep inside herself. When she spoke again, her voice was clearer, stronger, carrying the weight of someone who had decided that hiding was no longer an option. "Finding someone to walk me down the aisle," she repeated. "That's what I worried about on my wedding day. That's what I still worry about for my daughter someday." The Martinez family had stopped celebrating their potential steal opportunity. The audience had gone from restless to riveted. Even the scoreboard, with its bright digital display ready to reveal survey answers, seemed suddenly intrusive and irrelevant in the face of this moment of raw human truth. Steve set down his question cards on the nearest podium with deliberate care. The small action sent a clear signal to everyone in the studio, the producers in the booth, the camera operators, the audience members leaning forward in their seats. This wasn't about the game anymore. This had become something much more important. "Lisa," he said, his voice soft, but carrying clearly through the studio's perfect acoustics. "Can you tell me what you mean by that?" The question was an invitation, a gentle opening of a door that Lisa had kept carefully closed for months. She looked at Steve, really looked at him, and seemed to see past the television persona to the father, the husband, the man who understood what it meant to love someone enough to protect them from pain. "My daddy," Lisa began, her voice gaining strength even as tears gathered in her eyes. "He was supposed to walk me down the aisle 6 months ago. We planned the whole wedding around his chemotherapy schedule. We researched every treatment center within driving distance, scheduled around his good days and bad days. We thought if we planned it perfectly, if we hoped hard enough, he'd be strong enough to walk with me." Steve felt something shift in his chest, that familiar tightness that came when someone's story connected with his own experiences of love and loss. He'd interviewed thousands of people over his decades in television, but there was something about Lisa's quiet dignity, her refusal to dramatize her pain, that cut straight through his professional defenses. "He picked out the flowers with me," Lisa continued, her voice growing steadier as she spoke. "White roses and baby's breath, because he said they reminded him of my mother's bouquet. He helped me choose the music for the ceremony. He even practiced his speech in the mirror every morning, while he was getting dressed for his treatments." The studio had become a cathedral of attention. 300 people sat in complete silence, witnessing something they instinctively understood was sacred. The cameras kept rolling, but everyone behind them seemed to have forgotten they were making television. "What happened, sweetheart?" Steve asked, though the gentle way he asked it suggested he already sensed the answer that was coming. Lisa drew a shaky breath, the kind that comes before words you never wanted to have to say. "He died 3 weeks before the wedding. Sudden complications from the chemo. One day he was helping me address invitations, making jokes about how he was going to embarrass me during the father-daughter dance. The next day he was gone. The air seemed to leave the room all at once. The audience's collective intake of breath was audible, a sound like wind moving through trees. Several people in the front row brought their hands to their hearts. Behind Lisa, her mother's composure finally broke completely, and her quiet sobs provided a heartbreaking soundtrack to her daughter's words. Steve took one step forward, then another, until he was standing beside Lisa's podium rather than across from it. The movement was instinctive, the response of someone who recognized that this moment required proximity, not distance. He wasn't a game show host anymore. He was simply a human being trying to bridge the space between one person's pain and another's understanding. "I tried to postpone everything," Lisa said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "The venue, the flowers, the whole celebration. It felt wrong to have a wedding without him. But the deposits were paid, family was flying in from across the country, and my fiancé, my husband now, he said something that changed my mind. Steve waited, giving her the space she needed to find her words. He said, "Your father spent 6 months planning to walk you down that aisle. The least we can do is make sure you get to walk down it." So we kept the date. 8 months later, we had our wedding. She looked up at Steve, her eyes shining with unshed tears, but also with something else, a strength that came from having survived the unthinkable and found a way to keep moving forward. But when that music started, when everyone stood up and turned to look at me, standing alone at the back of that church, I realized something I hadn't prepared for. There was no one there to take my arm. No one to whisper last-minute encouragement in my ear. No one to hand me off to my husband with a father's blessing. Steve's hand moved instinctively toward her shoulder, a gesture of comfort that transcended the artificial boundaries between host and contestant. "What did you do?" "I walked alone," Lisa said simply. "Because that's what Daddy taught me to do. He always said I was strong enough to handle anything life threw at me." "But Steve," her voice cracked slightly, "it was the loneliest walk of my life." The silence that followed wasn't the awkward quiet that sometimes fell over television studios when things went off script. This is the reverential silence of people recognizing that they were witnessing something profound, something that transcended entertainment and touched the fundamental human experiences of love, loss, and the courage to keep moving forward when the people who were supposed to walk beside us are no longer there. Steve Harvey, who had built a career on quick wit and perfect timing, who had navigated thousands of unexpected moments with grace and humor, found himself in completely uncharted territory. But what happened next would define not just this episode, but his entire understanding of what it meant to be present for another human being in their moment of need. He didn't think about the cameras, the producers frantically whispering in the control room, or the millions of viewers who would eventually watch this moment. He thought only about Lisa, standing there in her courage and vulnerability, sharing a piece of her heart with strangers, because sometimes that's what healing requires. Steve Harvey did something that had never happened in the history of Family Feud. He walked away from the game entirely. Not to his podium, not to consult with producers, not to commercial break. He walked straight to Lisa and, without a word, wrapped her in the kind of hug that fathers give daughters, that brothers give sisters, that human beings give each other when words aren't enough. The audience rose to their feet, not because they were prompted by cue cards or directed by producers, but because they couldn't remain seated in the face of such raw, honest human connection. The applause that followed wasn't the manufactured enthusiasm of television entertainment. It was the sound of 300 people recognizing something authentic and beautiful happening in front of their eyes. Steve held Lisa for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. When he finally stepped back, he kept both hands on her shoulders, anchoring her in that moment of overwhelming emotion. "Lisa," he said, his voice thick with feeling, "I need you to know something. And I need everyone in this studio, and everyone watching at home to hear this too." The studio fell silent again, waiting. "Your daddy didn't miss your wedding," Steve said, his words carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "He was there. He was in every step you took down that aisle. He was in the strength that got you from the back of that church to the front. He was in the love that filled that room. In your mama's tears, in your husband's face when he saw you walking toward him." Steve turned slightly to address the entire studio, his voice rising just enough to ensure everyone could hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we just witnessed here isn't about a game show question. This beautiful woman just showed us what real courage looks like. She showed us what it means to keep walking when you think you have to walk alone." The applause came again, deeper this time, sustained. But Steve held up a gentle hand, indicating he wasn't finished. "Lisa," he continued, looking directly at her again, "I want you to know that when your daughter gets married, and I can see that beautiful young lady standing right there with your family, when she gets married and she needs someone to walk her down the aisle, you call me." That's not a television promise. That's a promise from one parent to another. The emotion in the studio was palpable now. Even the Martinez family had completely forgotten they were in a competition. Carlos Martinez, the patriarch, wiped his eyes openly and called across the stage, "Steve, we came here to win some money. Today we met family instead." What followed was unprecedented in game show history. Both families spontaneously left their podiums and gathered around Lisa, creating a circle of support that encompassed everyone on stage. The Martinezes and the Chens, strangers 30 minutes ago, now stood together as one extended family united by their witness to something beautiful and true. Steve reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his personal business card. Not a prop, not something prepared for television, but the actual card he carried with his private contact information. "This has my personal number on it," he told Lisa, placing the card in her hands. "Not my manager's, not my assistant's. Mine. And I want you to use it the next time you have a moment where you feel like you're walking alone. Because you're not alone, Lisa. You've got a whole world of people who understand exactly what you're carrying." The tears were flowing freely now, not just from Lisa and her family, but from audience members, crew members, even the usually stoic camera operators. This wasn't television anymore. This was life, happening in real time, witnessed by everyone present. But Steve wasn't finished. In a gesture that would become legendary in the Family Feud community, he began removing his burgundy suit jacket, the same jacket he'd worn for hundreds of episodes, his signature piece that had become as much a part of the show as the questions themselves. "Your daddy can't be here to walk you down any more aisles," Steve said, draping the jacket gently over Lisa's shoulders. "But he raised a daughter who knows how to walk with strength, with grace, with love. This jacket has been with me through every kind of show. Funny ones, sad ones, ordinary ones, and extraordinary ones like this. Today it's going home with the bravest woman I've ever met." The jacket was far too large for Lisa's small frame, but she wore it like armor, like a blessing, like the physical manifestation of love that transcends the boundaries we think separate strangers from family. The cameras captured every moment in perfect detail. The golden lights reflecting off tears, the burgundy of the jacket gagged Lisa's navy dress, the circle of people surrounding her with their support and love. It was television, but it was also something much more important than television. When the show finally resumed, it was transformed. The game continued, but now both families were playing for Lisa. Every correct answer was celebrated by everyone on stage. When the Martinez daughter got one right, she pointed directly at Lisa. When Lisa's own daughter successfully answered a question, Steve applauded like a proud uncle watching his niece succeed. The final score became irrelevant. Steve declared both families winners because some moments are bigger than games, bigger than rules, bigger than anything that can be manufactured or produced. Both families went home with prize money, but more importantly, they went home with the knowledge that they had participated in something meaningful. As the confetti fell and the show wrapped, Steve called Lisa to center stage one final time. The cameras were still rolling, preparing to capture the show's closing moments, but Steve had something more to say. "Before we finish," he announced, "I want to do something for someone who couldn't be here today but who made this moment possible." He looked directly into the main camera, the one that would carry his words to millions of homes across America. "Mr. Chen," Steve said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute sincerity, "I never got to meet you, but I know exactly who you were by the daughter you raised." Lisa walked down that aisle alone in body, but she walked with your strength, your love, your lessons in her heart. You raised a woman who keeps walking even when it hurts, who shows up even when she's scared, who shares her truth even when it makes her vulnerable. Sir, you did good. You did real good. The studio was silent again, but this time it was the silence of reverence, of recognition, of 300 people understanding that they had just witnessed love, speaking across the boundaries of life and death. Steve handed Lisa the microphone. "You want to say something to your daddy?" Lisa took the microphone with trembling hands. She looked past the cameras, past the lights, past the studio, to a place where love lives forever. "Daddy," she said, her voice steady and strong, "I hope you're proud of the woman you raised. Every day, I try to walk the way you taught me, with courage, with kindness, with faith that tomorrow holds something beautiful. And Daddy, thank you for teaching me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is keep walking, even when you think you have to walk alone, because I know now that I was never really alone. You were with me every step." The final applause wasn't applause at all. It was the sound of recognition, of shared humanity, of people intending that everyone has a walk like Lisa's. Everyone has a moment when they think they must face something alone. 3 months later, when the episode aired, it became the highest-rated Family Feud episode in the show's history. Not because of drama or conflict, but because millions of viewers recognized something authentic in a world that often feels manufactured. The episode sparked conversations in homes across America about love, loss, courage, and what it means to show up for each other when it matters most. Steve's inbox flooded with letters. Daughters wrote about missing fathers. Fathers wrote about hugging their daughters tighter. Wedding planners wrote about creating special moments for brides walking alone. The episode became a cultural touchstone, a reminder of what television could be when it stopped trying to entertain and started trying to connect. Lisa returned to Sacramento, forever changed. She still teaches second grade, still drives the same reliable sedan, still struggles with the same financial pressures that brought her family to Family Feud in the first place. But something fundamental had shifted. The jacket hangs in her closet now, carefully preserved, and on the hardest days, she wears it like a reminder that she is never truly alone. Her students sometimes ask about the famous television host who gave her his jacket. She tells them the truth, that sometimes strangers become family in an instant, that love shows up in unexpected ways, that courage isn't about not being scared, it's about being scared and walking forward anyway. Steve Harvey kept his promise in ways that extended far beyond that initial gesture. When Lisa's daughter graduated from high school, she received a congratulatory video message. When Lisa faced budget cuts at her school and worried about losing her position, she found herself connected with resources and support networks she never knew existed. The business card became more than contact information. It became a symbol of the way human beings can show up for each other when connection matters more than convenience. The jacket itself became something of a legend in the Family Feud community. New staff members are told Lisa's story as part of their orientation, not as entertainment, but as a reminder of what the show can be at its absolute best. Not just a platform for games and prizes, but a place where authentic human connection can happen. Steve Harvey has said in numerous interviews that Lisa's episode changed him fundamentally as a host and as a person. "I realized that day that my job isn't to run a game show," he explained. "My job is to create space where people can be their most authentic selves, where families can be celebrated, where someone's truth can be heard and honored." The producers kept every frame of raw footage from that day. While the full, unedited version has never been publicly released, those who have seen it describe it as one of the most powerful pieces of television ever recorded, not because of technical brilliance or production value, but because it captured something increasingly rare in our world, a moment of absolute, unguarded human connection. Today, Lisa's family still gathers to watch Family Feud together. It's become their tradition, their way of remembering not just their moment on television, but their reminder that love persists across every boundary we think exists. That sometimes it comes wrapped in a game show host's jacket. Sometimes it speaks through the courage of a woman who refuses to let fear silence her truth. Sometimes it shows up in a television studio and reminds everyone present that the most important things in life can't be scripted, can't be produced, can't be manufactured. They can only be lived, witnessed, and shared. And Steve Harvey still carries an extra pocket square in his jacket, just in case someone needs their tears wiped away, just in case another Lisa walks onto his stage, carrying something too heavy for one person to bear, needing nothing more than someone to listen, someone to see, someone to remind them that love never really leaves. It just changes the way it walks beside you.